This is Chapter 21, Section 3, Part 2. And in our previous lesson, we were talking about the changes in Central, Eastern, and Western Europe due to the 30 Years' War. So Austria grows stronger after the 30 Years' War and the division of Germany. One of these families was the Habsburgs of Austria. The Austrian Habsburgs took several steps to becoming absolute monarchs. And just like our previous lesson, we talked about in the 1600s, two German speaking families decided to try the vacuum gap to become absolute rulers in this Germanic states. And one of these was going to be the Austrian Habsburgs, and they took several steps to become absolute monarchs. The first, during the 30 Years' War, they reconquered Bohemia, and the Habsburgs wiped out Protestantism there, and that was created by the Czech nobility that pledged loyalty to them. Second, after the war, the Habsburgs rulers centralized the government and created a standing army, so taking control of the military. And third, in 1699, the Habsburgs had retaken Hungary from the Ottoman Empire, and we talked about the Ottoman Empire and what they controlled back in the day, which is pretty extensive if you look around this area. It looks like the Ottoman Empire didn't really go into Europe too much, just around this green area and around the Mediterranean Sea. But like I said, the Ottoman Empire was going to be crushed after WW1, but we're not going to get into that later. That's World War I for all you. In 1711, Charles VI became the Habsburgs' ruler. Man, he looks like a respectable gentleman. Charles' empire was a difficult one to rule. With its borders lived a diverse assortment of peoples. Czechs, Hungaries, Italians, Croatians, and Germans. Only the fact that the Habsburgs' ruler wore an Austrian and Hungary and Bohemian crowns kept the empire together, so he was wearing a bunch of crowns on top of his head. Maria Theresa inherits the Austrian throne. How could the Habsburgs make sure that they continued to rule all those lands? Charles VI spent his entire reign working out the answer to his problem. With endless arm twisting, he persuaded the leaders of Europe to sign an agreement that declared they would recognize Charles' eldest daughter as an heir to all the Habsburg territories. Now, this is kind of uncommon. Women didn't usually take over European countries. But I guess he persuaded a bunch of people that this was the right thing to do. The heir was the young woman named Maria Theresa. In theory, this agreement guaranteed Maria Theresa a peaceful reign. Instead, she faced years of war. What do you know? The main enemy was Prussia, a state to the north of Austria. Prussia is a northern region of Germany, what is now today Germany. My ancestors were actually from Prussia. So like Austria, Prussia rose to power in the late 1600s. And like the Habsburgs of Austria, Prussia's ruling family, the Hohenzollerns, also had ambitions. And those ambitions threatened to upset Central Europe's delicate balance of power. The Hohenzollerns built up their state from a number of small holdings, beginning with the German states of Brandenburg and Prussia. In 1640, the 20-year-old Hohenzollern named Frederick William inherited the title, an elector of Brandenburg. After seeing the destruction of the 30 Years' War, Frederick William, later known as the Great Elector, decided that having a strong army was the only way to ensure safety. He might be right. To protect the lands, the Great Elector and his descendants moved towards absolute monarchy. And we talked about this in our previous lesson. Absolute monarchy is a king or a queen controlling the land. They're not elected. They're just born into it because Apparently, God said so. They have divine power. And absolute monarchy is like when you control everything. There's no councils, there's no nothing. There's no parliament, there is no Congress, there's no president, no one's getting elected. It's just you, and you are the state. You control everything. They created a standing army. The best in Europe, too. They built it up to a force of 80,000 men. Now, that was a lot back then. To pay for the army, they introduced a permanent taxation. What? Beginning with the great elector's son, they called themselves kings. They also weakened the representative assemblies of the territories, and that's what they're going to do to become an absolute monarchy. Like I said, if you weaken representatives and assemblies that people could get behind, you're going to control that land. You're going to control everything about your government. It's going to be no bueno. Prussia's land-owning nobility, the Junkers, resisted the king's growing power. Yeah, I would too. However, in the early 1700s, King Frederick William I, he bought their cooperation. He gave the Junkers exclusive right to be officers in the army. So these guys would be in charge of the army. Smart on him. As a result, Prussia became rigidly controlled, highly by militarized society. So most of Prussia was going to be very militarized. It's going to be controlled by the military, by force. So you're not going to be able to get away with anything. Frederick William worried that his son Frederick was not a military enough to rule. The prince loved music, philosophy, and poetry. That doesn't really sound like a military man. In 1730, when he and his friend tried to run away, they were caught. To punish Frederick, the king ordered him to witness his friend's beheading. Dude, they chopped his friend's head off. That's ridiculous. Despite such bitter memories, Frederick II, known as Frederick the Great, followed his father's military policies when he became to power. Maybe because he saw his friend's head get chopped off. However, he also softened some of his father's laws. With regard to domestic affairs, he encouraged religious toleration and legal reform. According to his theory of government, Frederick believed that a ruler should be like a father to his people. The War of Austrian Succession. In 1740, Maria Theresa succeeded her father just 5 months after Frederick II became King of Prussia. Frederick wanted the Austrian land of Silesia, which bordered Prussia. Silesia produced iron ore, textiles, and food products. Frederick underestimated Maria Theresa's strength. He assumed that because she was just a woman, she would not be forceful enough to defend their lands. It's not correct there, Frederick. You were wrong. In 1740, he sent an army to occupy Silesia, beginning with the War of Austrian Succession. Even though Maria Theresa had recently given birth, she journeyed to Hungary. There, she held her infant in her arms as she asked the Hungarian nobles for aid. Hey, can you come help me? Even though the Hungarian nobles hated the Habsburg rulers, they pledged to give Maria Theresa an army. Oh man, why would you do that? Great Britain also joined Austria to fight the longtime enemy France, which was Prussia's ally. Whoa. Although Maria Theresa did not stop Prussia's aggression, she lost Silesia in the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748. I probably did not pronounce that correct. With the acquisition of Silesia, Prussia became a major European power. So it looks like Prussia gained that territory of Silesia, which was right here. And he was going to take that from Maria Theresa and the Habsburg family. Silesia produced iron ore, textiles, and food products. Why would losing this area to Prussia be a problem for Austria? Well, it's going to take a lot of business away from you, that's why. All right, the 7 Years' War. The First Global War. Maria Theresa decided that the French kings were no longer Austria's chief enemies. She made an alliance with them as the result of a diplomatic Revolution. When Frederick heard of her actions, he signed a treaty with Britain, who was once Austria's former ally. Now, Austria, France, and Russia and others were aligned against Britain and Prussia. That's crazy that Britain and Prussia, basically Britain and Germany, were kind of on the same force back in the day. And then they would only go to war in World War I and World War II. Not only had Austria and Prussia switched allies, but for the first time, Russia was playing a role in European affairs. Yeah, what the heck's Russia doing here? Man, this is going to be the first global war. This is crazy. In 1756, Frederick attacked Saxony, an Austrian ally. Soon, every great European power was involved in the war. Fought in Europe, India, North America. This lasted till 1763. It was called the 7 Years' War. The war did not change the territorial situation in Europe. It did in North America. I'm surprised this was not considered World War I, but it wasn't. Don't get it confused with World War I. That's not going to happen for another 250 years? 200 years? No, 200 years. Less than 200 years. All right, the French and Indian War in North America. It was a different story on the other continents, like I said. Both France and Britain had colonies in North America and West Indies. Both were competing economically in India. The British emerged as the real victors in the 7 Years' War, as we talked about previously. We touched up on this a little bit. We talked about Louis XIV. France lost its colonies to North America. Yeah, we know that. Britain gained sole economic domination of India. This set the stage for further British expansion in India into the late 1800s and revolution in France. So this was going to start to change a lot of things, the 7 Years' War. And we will get into this, we'll get into those changes later on in some of our upcoming lessons, but that was your lesson for today. That ends section 3. Hopefully you learned something. Have a great day. Peace out.